Okay, we're gonna start in about 2 minutes. I'll upload, in the meantime, I'll upload the PowerPoint presentation. Good afternoon. Okay, let's get started. Okay, the others, I guess, will join us as we go on. So the makeup of tonight's class, homework number 3, review previous lesson, and today's lesson. Homework number 3 was done very well by everybody. There weren't any areas that required or that require me going over. So like I said, everyone did extremely well on that. I think everyone got 100%. So I won't spend time going over that. Okay. Just want to do a quick preview, a couple of minutes on last class. We continue to look at ability, and we're coming toward the end of looking at ability. Before we move on to margin, what we covered in last class was the monthly commitments and debt service ratios with regard to rent payments. And then I just said in passing about loans being paid off in 4 months or less, not to be too concerned about that, because not many banks use that option. But what was important was the dealing with the rent payments, and also the third point on the bottom, determining monthly credit card commitments or exposure. And the most important thing on this third point is that the monthly commitments is expressed as a percentage of the credit limit, okay? And we said that is because regardless of what the balance is, if the balance is 0, the balance could be $10. The client can take that account or take that card up to its limit at any point in time. So rather than doing it as a just based on the minimum payment based on the balance, we do it as a percentage of the credit limit. Then we talked about confirming incomes and verifying incomes for employed persons. And we said that it should be verified rather than taken at face value. So client can declare how much they're making from their job, but we need to verify that income from salary confirmation letters, pay stubs, and calling in to the place of business to speak with the appropriate person, preferably the person who signed the letterhead, and also to confirm that they were authorized to sign on behalf of the company or the business. So we said that there's some essential elements that should be in that income or salary confirmation letter or employment confirmation letter. Depends on what you call it. Some people call it the employment confirmation, the income confirmation, job confirmation or verification, whatever. They're all the same thing. So it should have the company's official letterhead, current date, position of employee, commencement date of employment, indicate that the employee is currently employed there. So watch the tenses, like, Mr. Norwich was employed here. So you want to see something that's saying that he is currently employed or he's employed in the position of such and such. Should state the employee's income and should contain the signature of the person, signature and position of the person who was signing. Okay. Then we looked at self-employed persons. And we said ideally the most recent 3 years financial statements and corresponding bank statements to be obtained in order to assess the income. And that is because we want to see whether or not the bank statements, particularly the credit turnover, has some close correlation to the gross revenue declared in those financial statements. Given that we've had 2 years of COVID, it would be prudent to ask for the 2 additional years prior to COVID. So you may end up looking at 5 in this environment, looking at 5 years financial statements instead of 3. Okay, but generally speaking, 3 years would give you should give you a fair idea of how the company is doing. And similar to how we did commission income, we said the average of the 3 years is to be utilized as present income. However, this amount should not or cannot exceed the most recent year's income. And the note to the bottom, most, if not all, businesses are now required to provide financial statements in order to satisfy annual renewal of business licenses. These financial statements must be signed off by a certified accountant. And I mentioned that in the times past, certainly when I was involved about 20, 25 years ago, we had to help the clients put these together if we wanted a business. But nowadays, it's a requirement for VAT purposes as well as for annual renewal of business license purposes, that all persons, whether they are businesses generating $100,000 or less or over that amount, that they must submit evidence of the level of income in which they're earning. So if they are earning $100,000 or less, or I should say up to $100,000, they are exempt from VAT. So if they're over that threshold, then they have to also provide VAT figures or figures for VAT. But everyone has to supply some sort of financial statements in order to get their business license renewed. So that is diminishing as a hurdle for financial institutions or lenders nowadays. And we looked at actual calculations of two examples of one in which we use the average and one we use the most recent year. We then moved on to asking some questions about other sources of income. And you have to be careful with other sources of income because we want to make sure that they are stable. We want to know whether or not they're long-term or short-term, because if they're, we want them to be at least sufficiently long enough to cover the term that we are financing. So if someone, if someone's saying, you know, they're going to be working part-time for 5 years because they have on a second job, you don't want to use that income and finance them longer than 5 years. So you want to do it just under 5 years or 5 years tops. Then you want to find out if there are any contracts or agreements that the client has to support any other income streams. And very rarely used by financial institutions, but also another source of income, if determined properly, is alimony or child support payments. And the question you want to ask, are these court ordered and enforced? So were they ordered by the court and are they enforced by the courts? That is, does the person, the obligant pay by salary deduction directly into the courts so that the receiver who's come to you for a loan is almost guaranteed to get their money? So those are some questions you want to ask yourself when you're looking at other sources of income. Then we looked at 3 exercises. We did 3 exercises of increasing, I guess, degree of difficulty or just adding different things. So the first one we looked at was a single person with just a salaried income, and we mixed up some of the inputs. So, like for example, the salary was expressed yearly, so we had to turn it express it monthly. We had some expenses, so we had the 3 typical areas of expenses: mortgage, credit cards, and personal loans. The second one we threw in, again, as a single individual borrowing, but we threw in a secondary source of income, which was rental income, and how we use 50% of rental income along with 50% of gratuities, tips, etc. Then the third one is when we actually included tips and a second person, a co-borrower, and so we completed that, and then we moved on to a in-class, I guess you call it calculation, in-class calculation. This one is Charles and Irene Bow, fictitious clients, and we use the figures. There's no narrative, but we had all the figures that we needed were already contained in the spreadsheet. And I mentioned that the shaded areas, there were 3 columns to be completed. So there's a monthly amount, the percentage used of the monthly amount, and the adjusted amount. Okay, and I stated Tuesday that all the areas that are shaded will guide you as to what needs to be, what fields need to be completed. So if you leave any of these fields empty, either on an assignment or in the final exam, you're going to be throwing away points. Okay, so the first column, we have to express everything monthly that is not expressed monthly. And even if it's expressed monthly, we put the monthly amount in it to show that we understand that when we are analyzing a loan, or we're calculating debt service ratios, we are calculating everything on monthly, because for the most part, payments are on a monthly basis. Now, sometimes when you're dealing with government lending or some types of other business lending, you may be looking at quarterly payments, etc., or longer than 1 month, or you may be looking at seasonal payments. But for the most part, the types of credits that you would come upon in your everyday life as a lender, or if you're not in lending yet, coming into lending would be your typical monthly loans that require monthly payments. Okay. Then the second column is the percentage used, and so we're concerned about that on the income side. How much of that income we use? How much of salary, gratuity, bonuses, rent, and I mentioned that there's a legend to the bottom, kind of like a cheat sheet. So salary says use 100%, rental income, gratuity, and bonuses use 50%. The credit cards, it will tell you whether to use 3% or 5% Okay, so it'll tell you what percentage to use when it comes to the credit cards. So you have all the information at your fingertips, pretty much as if you are at work. So it's really the calculation that we are concerned about, and how you arrive at your figure. And that is the main concern of this course, not whether or not you remember that you should use 100% or 50% or what the formula is. So, because like I said in last class, you can have these things at your fingertips, at your workstation. So we're really looking at how do you analyze and get your actual figures. So plugging in the figures, the right figures, and in the right places is paramount in your day-to-day job as a lender, and also in this course. Okay, so we did Charles and Irene Bow, and we set a debt TDSR, and there were three different ratios you could use, and so we're going to use 45.66, 45.7, or 46.0%. Any one of those will be acceptable in the in your assignments, homework, final exam. Okay, and the reason for that is some banks want to do the double decimal points, some single, some want to round it up. So we're looking at all the possibilities to make sure that we cover the ground for all possibilities in the financial services sector when you're dealing with loans. So that brings us, any questions on that?
I'm good, sir.
Okay, so that brings us to tonight's lesson. And what we're going to dive into is our in-class case study, Martin and Sherry Roll. Okay. We started off by looking at, when we first started this in-class case study, we looked at their bank statements. When we were talking about payment histories or late payment histories, or billing buckets or late buckets, or whatever you call them, cycles. And so we looked at their mortgage statement and their personal loan or car loan statement. Next, we looked at the net worth statement. So tonight we're going to be looking at their calculating that debt service, their total debt service ratio. So we're going to look at Martin and Sherry Roll, and the write-up is on page 101, and we have the actual spreadsheet is on page 106. Okay, so you want to be able to flip back and forth as we go through Martin and Sherry Roll. What I have done is I've on the spreadsheet, I've already inserted the information. Okay, so so we don't have to spend time going through the write-up on page 101 to put in figures. Okay, so let's begin. Let's start with the incomes, as we should. And the first person's income is Martin Roll. He has salaried income and he has gratuity. He makes $450 a week as salaried income. What amount is that monthly?
1,950.
Okay, 1,950. Okay, and what percentage of that do we use?
100, sir.
100%, yes. And we'll either know that from memory or we'll refer to the legend below. Okay, and so the adjusted amount would be the same as the monthly amount, in this case, $1,950. Now he earns $300 a week in gratuity tips. How much is that on monthly?
That would be about $1,300, sir.
That would be exactly $1,300. And how much of that do we use?
We would use only 50% of that, which would be $650.
Okay, very good. So we've completed Martin Rule's income. We now move to his wife, Sherry Rule. She has salaried income of $2,200 a month. How do we deal with that? For column 1.
If we're dealing with a salary, it's already presented in monthly form, so we would just say a monthly payment is $2,200 per month, and we're using 100% that salary.
So the adjusted amount would be $2,200 as well. Okay. Now what about bonus? Go through bonus, the 3 columns on bonus.
$750 monthly.
$750 monthly.
We're using 50%, so $375.
Okay, very good. We're using 50%, so it's $375. So we've calculated their incomes. There's no more income declared. So we need to do the total income or total usable income. Okay, because the total income would be what's in the monthly column, that first column. So the total usable income or adjusted income would be what's in that far right column. So what is the total of that adjusted, income?
Is it 5,000?
5,175.
5,175, correct. Very good. Okay, so now we have, let's move to the mortgage, to the expenses. And the first item is the mortgage at Finco, where they spend $975. They make a payment of $975 per month. How do we treat that in the monthly column and the adjusted amount column?
Those are already presented, so we could just monthly amount $975 per month, and adjusted would be the same.
Okay, very good. What about the car loan?
That follows the same. So $530 a month is already presented, and that'll also be in the adjusted amount.
Okay, very good. And what about this proposed loan that they're going to be getting at Royal Bank?
That's the same, $340,
Yes.
and then the adjusted amount is $340 as well.
Okay, very good. Okay. Credit cards. Credit cards.
Credit cards would be at 5%.
Right.
On the limit. So the limit for the first one, 5% of 4,000 is 200.
Okay.
And that'll be the adjusted amount also.
Very good.
And then 5% on 3,200 is 160, and that'll be the adjusted amount as well.
Okay, very good. And what is the total expenses?
2,205.
2,205. Yes. Okay. So let's work out the total net service. Total net servicing. What is the total? What is the total net service?
That would be the 2,205, sorry.
2,205,
Over the 5,175.
Yes.
Multiplied by 100. And that will give you 42.61.
Okay, so 42.61 or 42.6 or rounded up to 43. Okay. Whatever your preference is in this class, or whatever preference your bank requires. Any one of those three answers would be correct. Okay. So that brings us to the end of ability. Next, we will move on to we move on to margin. Before we move on to margin, are there any questions on? Any questions on what we've covered on ability?
No, no questions from me.
I'm good.
No questions.
Okay. All right, so let's move to margin. And margin is the bank's profit potential. So we'll look a little bit about profit potential, how to determine the profitability of a product, a loan product or credit product. Okay. So margin is the bank's profit potential, and it is usually set by executive management based on certain criteria. Okay, and one of those first criteria is the interest rate. Is the interest rate priced to reflect the risk and fees? So the profit margin has basically two, I guess you could call it a two-pronged fork. Okay, so you're making money off the interest that you charge the customer, and you also make money off any fees that go along with that product. So so as we will discuss as we go along, for example, and I think we have said it before, you'll find that mortgages, because they're secured by real estate, they tend to be less risky than consumer loans. So the interest rates on mortgages tend to be lower than they are on consumer loans. Okay, so the higher the risk, the higher the interest rate. Okay, generally speaking, and we'll look at some. We'll look at this throughout, and then of course the fees are the fees in line with the product being granted. Okay, so we'll look at that as well. So the first item we want to look at would be the interest rate. Okay, and so for example, overdrafts, and this is the first of several blanks. Okay, so the overdrafts, and again, if you don't have time to complete this, you'll be getting the PowerPoint presentation. So don't panic if you don't get it, the fill in the blanks as we're going along, but hopefully you'll be given sufficient time to write them down. So overdrafts are usually charged a margin over prime. Okay. So now I've said that margin is a bank's profit potential, but I'm also using margin in another sense of the word. Okay. So it's really a play on this. The margin being used here is also I guess you could call it a play on the word margin. Okay, so we don't have two eyes. We don't have two eyes in compari. We only have one eye, and we use that last eye for insurance rather than interest. But then again, if we said interest, then you would be, negating the use of fees. So they came up with the use of the word margin to reflect the profit potential. But also what's being used here when they talk about overdrafts, they usually charge a margin over prime. It means the difference between the prime rate and the actual loan rate or the rate that is being charged to the client. So for example, prime, what is prime now? 4.5? So if prime is 4.5% and you're charging a client 9%, no, let me not use 9%. Let me use 7%. Okay, so if prime is 4.5% and you're charging the client 7%, what is the difference between 4.5 and 7%?
2.5%.
Sorry, the first part was broken off. Did you say 1.5%?
2.5%, sir.
2.5%. Okay, correct. Okay, so in this instance, when we're using the word margin over prime, or what is the margin, we're talking about the difference between the cost of funds, okay, because prime is normally the cost of funds, what it costs the bank to get this money. So prime is usually our cost of funds here in the Bahamas. Okay, so the difference between the cost of funds and the actual interest rate charged to the customer. And it's the difference. So when we're saying it's usually charged a margin over prime, that word margin means what is the difference between prime or cost of funds and the actual interest rate that was charged. You understand that?
I think I do.
Okay. So, well, it'll get a little clearer when we begin going through and looking at some examples later on when we, I think in chapter 8 it is. Yes, when we look at product pricing, okay? So, but the thing to remember is it is a difference between whatever the prime rate, or in the Bahamas, our cost of funds, and the actual rate. So if prime rate is 4.5, the interest rate that we charge the customer on that particular product is 7%. The margin or the difference is 2.5%, the difference between the two, okay? So it's, on overdrafts, it's usually charged a margin or a higher amount over the prime or difference. For personal loans or consumer loans, it's usually a variable interest rate tied to prime. And that is done so that that is done because if the prime rate changes, we want to be flexible enough to be able to make, so if the prime rate goes down, the amount charged to the client should go down because if it's tied to prime, okay. So some of them may be, 5% over prime, they may be 10% over prime, or 10.5% over prime. But whatever it is, whatever happens to prime, if the prime rate goes up, the prime rate goes down, that loan rate or that consumer loan will go up and down to correspond with, so we do not, as a financial institution, we do not lose our market. Our margin. We do not lose our margin. Okay. Now we will lose if it goes down. We will lose some interest because interest rate went down. But if we are overall concerned about our margins, more so than the profits, the dollar amount, then we just allow it to fluctuate. However, if we're more concerned about maintaining the dollar value of those profits, then if prime goes down by say half point, then we may want to increase our margin by 0.5%, so that although the interest rate goes down, we still make basically the same amount of money on that loan. So in the example that I gave, where margin was, let's say, the prime is 4.5. Okay, prime 4.5. The interest rate charge was 7. Okay, so if the prime goes up, okay, if prime goes up to 5, then the the interest amount charged to the customer will go up by 0.5, so it'll go up to 7.5. However, if the prime rate goes down from 4.5 to 4, the interest rate again goes down to 6.5. But we're making, whereas previously we were making 7% interest on this loan, we're only making 6.5%. So what we might want to do then is adjust so that we maintain the interest rate of 7%. So then the difference will then be, instead of being 2.5% or the margin being 2.5%, it'll actually be 3%, because it'll be 4% because the interest rate, now the prime rate went down to 4%. Okay, and we up the margin. So by upping the margin, we kept the interest rate at 7%. So the difference between 4 and 7 would be 3. Okay, so while on overdrafts we normally try to keep the margin, we want to, with personal loans, we try to keep the profitability going, because that is where the bulk of our money comes from. Okay, so when you look at overdrafts, personal loans, mortgages, most of our money comes from the consumer loans, because the interest rates are higher, and because there are normally many more consumer loans on the books than there are overdrafts or mortgages. Okay. And then, of course, we look at MLs or mortgage loans. Okay, it's usually a fixed rate tied to prime, and I have fixed in inverted commas, and that's because while we say it's a fixed rate, it actually moves up or down with prime. Okay, so it moves pretty much like the overdrafts would normally move. It won't move like the personal consumer loan. So for example, your margin is pretty much fixed with the mortgage loan. So if prime goes down from 4.5 to 4%, the bank should not be adjusting the interest rate to keep the interest rate at 7%. That rate should go down based on the covenants in the mortgage loan agreement. It should go down to 6.5%. So that's why they call it fixed, but it still floats whatever happens to prime. Okay. So that covers the interest rate. So let's look at fees. Okay. So it says here, the fees may be based on the product type and/or complexity of administration work required. So for example, a construction mortgage would carry a higher fee than a lot or residential purchase mortgage. The nature of construction mortgages is that it's not a one-time drawdown, because you're drawing it down in stages. So you have the loan officer, and they're normally, usually they're about 5 stages, okay, or thereabouts in construction, okay? So it means that if someone comes to me for construction mortgage, I'm going to be looking at that file every time the client requires, every time they finish a stage of that house, when they move from foundation to blocking up, to bell course, to roof, to finishing, and then of course you have a retention. So when they go through those different stages, the client is coming to you at those different stages, and so you have to go back to that file and do some administrative work in order for that payment amount to be processed. Whereas if the customer came to you for a lot loan or to purchase an existing house, usually you pay out all the funds at once. So once you pay out the funds, you don't have to go back to that account. So you'll find that the fees that we charge up front, we call them commitment fees or loan fees or whatever it is, facility fees or whatever it is you call it, would be higher for construction mortgage. So let's say, for example, on a lot or residential purchase, it may be 2%. On a construction mortgage, you may want to charge 2.5%, 3%. And that's basically to help compensate that you have to deal with that file more than once. In fact, like I said, you have to deal with that file at least 5 times after the first initial drawdown. Okay, so you want to make sure that the fee structure that you charge the client is congruent to the work involved or to the type of product that is granted. Similarly, business loans are reviewed annually. Okay, because of the nature of a business, you need to review the company's financials. Okay, so if Martin and Sherry will come to us for a loan, we charge them a one-time fee up front. Okay, but if Martin and Sherry Roll had come to us for a loan and it was a business loan, business loans are reviewed annually. And that's because they'll have to provide us with the annual financial statements, etc. Okay, and so because we are reviewing them on an annual basis, we will charge them a fee on an annual basis. So there'll be a fee upfront for doing the loan, and annually when we're reviewing that, even if it's a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year loan, because it's a business, all business loans are reviewed annually, and they attract a yearly fee. Okay. So what else you want to consider? You want to make sure you don't price yourself out of the market or make yourself lose your competitive edge. So, so for example, if all the other banks are charging 2% and 3% for the different products, you don't want to be charging 2.5 or 3% when they're charging 2%, and you want to be charging 4% when they're charging 2.5 or 3%. Okay, so you want to be as pretty much in line with whatever the industry is doing. Okay. Any questions on that?
No, sir.
Okay. So when let's look at take a little deeper dive into interest rates on loan products, and I'm going to get into something that I call TLC, almost like tender loving care, TLC, and PACT, PACT. Okay. So in terms of determining interest rates, so interest rates are determined by TLC and PACT. Like I said, I like to use acronyms because they help us to remember. TLC, you use TLC when you're considering the overall product risk. Okay, how risky is the product? And PACT is when you're considering the interest rate, when you're considering the customer or client risk. So TLC is the product. How risky is that product is? So I have the price. I have the price in the first instance. Remember when we said in several classes in the beginning, we said that you have to select your products, your team, et cetera, Well, when you are deciding what products to sell, you have to also price those products. Okay, and again, they must be competitive to what's happening in the industry. Okay, so TLC is the product. Okay, so I have an overdraft, I have a personal loan, I have mortgages. Those are my three basic loan products. Okay, how do I price them based on the product risk? How risky is that product? How risky is a mortgage? How risky is an overdraft? How risky is a consumer loan? Okay, and then the interest rate is further looked at, unpacked. Okay, which is the customer risk. How what is the risk of lending to this particular customer? Okay, to nurses as opposed to construction workers who are working high-rise buildings, to geophysicists. We don't do that here in the Bahamas. Okay, but elsewhere around the world, if your job is high risk, police officers, defense force officers, Marines, okay, people who work in high-rise apartments, people who work in labs, like how you have the scientists in labs with a lot of those dangerous chemicals. Depending on the level of danger associated with that person's job, you could also price the risk. Now you may say that's discrimination, but then again, if we're pricing overdrafts differently from personal loans and differently from mortgage loans, then we're discriminating against more loan products. So discriminating a customer type or the level of danger or risk involved with them is same. Life is made out of comparisons. Some people may call it discrimination, some may call it prejudices, right? But you have to have these differences when risk is concerned, because you have to be able to rate your risks. Okay, so unless you rate your risks, so for example, manufacturing businesses would attract a higher interest rate than someone selling clothing. Okay, someone in sheep herding would probably attract a higher interest rate because it is so risky and it's so rare. Okay, and it is not the type of business that most commercial banks get into. So when you get into manufacturing and farming and husbandry, those are specialized fields, and they're very, very risky. So unless the people who are getting into those are very skilled, and unless the people who are the lenders who are examining those or assessing those are properly trained themselves and qualified, you're taking on a whole lot of risk by lending to a manufacturing or farming agricultural venture. Okay, so let's look at TLC first, and let's see what those letters stand for. Okay, so as I said earlier, TLC is when you're considering the overall product risk. So what you want to consider is T, the type of loan risk. The type of loan risk. Okay. And that is, again, like I mentioned, whether it's a mortgage loan, consumer loan, or overdraft, or some other product, credit card. Okay. And for example, the interest rates on credit cards are on average 18% interest, which is one of the highest interest rates charged on a loan product anywhere in the world, not just in the Bahamas. And that's because most of those credit cards are unsecured debt. A lot of them not even by salary deduction. So the higher the risk, normally you find the higher the interest rate. Okay. You also have liquidity risk. okay? And liquidity risk involves the amount of money that the bank has to lend. Okay, so what you may find a bank will do is at the executive level, they'll say, for example, out of our portfolio, and let's say we have a simple portfolio, we just have overdrafts, we have consumer loans, we have mortgage loans. Okay, so we want to do only 10% of our total portfolio will be comprised of overdrafts. Okay, we want 60% of our portfolio in consumer loans, and the remaining 30% we want in mortgages. Okay, 10% for overdrafts, because overdrafts are risky, and you don't really give very sparingly. Okay, so generally speaking, overdrafts will make up a small portion of your of a bank's loan portfolio. Consumer loans, you want that to be the largest portion, because the nature of consumer loans, you make more interest off consumer loans. Okay, there's a quick turnaround, because within a day or two you could draw down a loan, as opposed to a mortgage that takes several months, because documentation has to be done by the lawyers, and by the time it all comes back, 3-4 months have passed. If you got a good lawyer and there are no hiccups, you might get by with a month or two. Okay, so mortgages are lower interest rate, and they take longer. But they're the most secure. So you still want to have a good percentage. So say 30% of your portfolio in mortgages, 60% in consumer loans, and 10% in overdrafts. Okay, so what you will do is you'll allocate. So if you have $10 million to lend, okay, 1 million of that will go towards overdrafts, 6 million of that will go to consumer loans, and the remaining 3 million, whatever it is, will go to mortgages. Okay. Now, if for some reason you have exhausted your 6 million of that 10 million for consumer loans, but you still have, you only did 2 million in mortgages, you may want to make a decision saying, something, mortgages moving a little slower. A lot of people aren't qualifying for homes. More people coming to us for consumer loans. So we'll use 1 million of the money allocated for mortgages. Okay, so then you'll end up with a portfolio of 2 million in mortgages, 7 million in consumer loans, and 1 million in overdrafts. Okay, but now if executive management says no, we don't want to do that, then you have a liquidity issue, because you can't lend no more because you lend your quota. So what it means is that you now look for another $1 million somewhere else. So you have to either get customers to come encourage customers to bring in funds to deposit to the bank, or you have to do interbank borrowing, go to another bank and borrow $1 million or whatever the amount is you require in order to, for you to be able to exceed your quota of that 6 million, because you only have 10 million to lend. Okay, and you certainly still want to lend 3 million mortgage loans. So you don't want to take 1 million from mortgage loans. So then you have to do what you have to do. You have to go out and borrow the money either from another bank or quote unquote borrow from depositors, because basically that's what you're doing. When depositors bring their money to you, you are borrowing their money to then turn around and let other people borrow from you. Okay, so we have T, type of loan risk, L, liquidity risk, and then this one that takes us into PAC or PACT is customer risk. So there's 3 risks to to consider when you're looking at the product risk: the type of loan risk, the liquidity risk, and the customer risk. Okay, so that's TLC. Now, PACT, like we said, PACT is the customer risk, which is the last item of product risk. Okay, so that's why that's in green, because we're going into now looking at the customer risk or the client risk using PACT. So when we are assessing the client risk, we look at the purpose of the credit facility. We look at the age of the client or the age of the business, if it's a business loan. We look at the collateral being offered, if any collateral is being offered. And we look at the term of the facility. Okay, so we look at the purpose of the credit facility, the age of the client or business, the collateral being offered, and the term of the facility. Okay, so two different things. TLC relates to the product risk, and PACT relates to the customer or client risk. Okay, and you see the curly bracket there, business loans and consumer loans versus mortgage loans. Okay, so what is the purpose? We have business loans, they tend to be more risky, same as consumer loans, versus mortgage loans, which tends to be less risky, except if you're giving a business a mortgage loan. Okay, so if it's a business mortgage loan, that moves into a higher risk category. Okay, and so I just put a note there. NB, note well, we will discuss in greater detail in the next chapter, pages 40 and 41, when we get to chapter 8. Okay, so we'll come again, and we'll look at TLC and PACT in more detail. Okay. When you application, you said about PAT, P-A-T. Okay. What you need to remember is, do not confuse PACT, which deals with pricing or interest rates, with PAT, which is loan application request. Okay, so when we're looking at application request, remember at PAT is the purpose, amount, term. Okay, so we're looking at demographics, financial information, and then the request itself. PAT is part of the request itself, purpose, amount, term. Okay, so here it is again, the credit loan application, client's request, PAT, when you're looking at the loan application. Okay, this is when you're looking at the customer or client risk using PACT. Okay, purpose of the credit facility, age of the client or the business, collateral offered if any, and the term of the facility. Any questions on that? Again, like I said, if it's not was fuzzy now, in chapter 8, when we look at it in more detail, it'll become clearer. So this is kind of just an introduction without getting into actual exercises. Any questions before I move on?
I'm good, sir.
Okay, so that takes care of margin for time being, which we said is a bank's profit potential. Okay, next we move on to purpose. Okay, and one of the things you'll notice that when we dealt with character, we spend a lot of time on character because it's Again, we said it's arguably the most important. And then we say ability was, we could consider that the second most important, next to character. So we spent quite a bit on ability. Margin, purpose, amount, repayment term, you'll find that we won't spend as much time on those. But then again, when we get into insurance or collateral security pledged, you'll find that we spend more time or considerable amount of time on the collateral security pledged. So your three main ones are that CA, the first A, ability, so character, ability, and then the final one, I, insurance. So now we turn our attention to purpose. And we're going to do a little exercise, almost like a little game, like. Okay. Okay, but before we get into the game, let's look a little bit at purpose, the use of funds. So let's go to page 36. Page 36, the top of page 36. Purpose is the use of the funds. What are the funds being borrowed for? What are they going to be used for? Okay. Well, first of all, we want to make sure that the purpose is legal. Secondly, we want to make sure that it is a sound purpose. And secondly, we want to make sure that it's worthwhile. Okay. You don't want people to be borrowing money for speculation. So, for example, they come to you and they say they want a pyramid scheme going on, or they want to go to, what it was called, a shore win or whatever them things. They want money to go and gamble with. Okay, those are not sound reasons for borrowing. Okay, so you want to make sure it's sound. You want to make sure it's legal, and you want to make sure that it's worthwhile. Okay. So for individuals, for example, it is to purchase an asset, again, not speculative. Businesses, it is going to be used for working capital, for fixed assets, for example, plant, machinery, and premises. Okay, so any questions on that before we look at we go into the little purpose term relationship little exercise here or game here? Any questions? No?
No, sir.
Okay. So let's look at okay, so let's look at our little game chart here. Okay, let me go to the next screen. Okay, there we go. Okay. So purpose and term relationship. So we have in the left-hand column, the purpose. So wedding, home improvement, investment, auto, education, debt consolidation, so on. And then on the right-hand side, we have two columns. The financing method. How would you finance those items listed under the purpose? Whether you would finance them via mortgage or consumer loan. Okay, so for wedding, would you finance a wedding via mortgage or consumer? What is most likely?
Well,
Consumer.
Yeah,
Consumer,
but
yes.
consumer, but some of these weddings be mortgages.
You're right. You're right. I've seen some on Facebook, or some, well, some of the figures, but I think the people are paying cash for them. Some of the figures I see for some of these weddings, 50,000, 100,000. Uh, you know, even some of these repasses. I passed a place on Prince Charles. They were having a repast, and they had like 3 huge tents set up, and under each one of those tents, there were these elaborate sofa type chairs and chandeliers, and I mean it was set up like I mean it was like you in a palace, and that was a repast.
That's
You
all
know?
that they had money.
So passes and weddings, particularly receptions, some people spend a good bit of dollars on them. Although I wouldn't recommend borrowing for weddings at all. I would say try to save up toward the wedding while while the people are dating. You all agree to save some money. She saved hers, he saved his. That way, if you do break up and don't get married, you haven't put the money on one account, so she could walk away with her money and he could walk away with his. But if the wedding does materialize, you could combine your money together and have your reception. I would prefer people spend the money on going on honeymoon, than on a reception. If you have to choose between a reception and honeymoon, go on a honeymoon, spend some time together alone from everybody, and then come back to real life. My wife and I, a personal experience, my wife and I, we've been married 36 years. We paid for our own wedding, and we deliberately chose that, although we knew that our parents on both sides wanted to contribute, but we chose that we were going to do our own wedding, because we wanted to control what happened at the wedding. Because normally when people pay for reception or whatever it is, they want to say what happens at the reception. So in any event, we paid for our own wedding, the reception, and so our plane wasn't leaving until the following day. So we overnighted at a local hotel in Providence. And so once we had left our reception, we went to the hotel, we rested a bit, and then we said, okay, well, we'll go and we'll hail our parents, right? So we'll start with her parents, and then we'll have my parents, and then we'll head back to the hotel. Well, lo and behold, when we got by our parents' house, all we see is cars, bunch of music playing, right? My mother-in-law was not satisfied with how we did our reception, so she decided she could throw her own party in our honor, although we knew nothing about it. Okay, and so when we bust inside, my parents and family sitting in there as well. So they threw their own party, which was supposed to be, or reception, which is supposed to be in our honor. But if we didn't go to say we were going to visit them, we would have heard about it after the fact. They was having a reception without us. Like I said, man, they had the music playing and good food and stuff. And an aunt of mine who's very conservative, who don't go out at nights. I was surprised when I looked and I saw her there. I said, "Oh my, okay." An elderly aunt. So people spend a lot of money on weddings. And in my estimation, if you have to borrow for a wedding, you should either hold back, or have your church wedding or civil wedding, and then do a reception when you can afford it later on, or even go on honeymoon later on. A friend of mine did that when they got married. The family threw a little something, Years after they come back and they got their own property, they built several condos. Then they decided they were going to have a little shitting, and but they did it under the guise of celebrating the completion of their condos, and then they went on their honeymoon, and that was like probably like 10 years later. By this time they had 2 or 3 kids, but they delayed it because they had a plan. Okay, and they weren't prepared to borrow for their wedding. If they borrowed, they wanted to borrow to build their condos. That's kind of extreme, but most people don't go that route. But like I said, if you have to borrow, consumer. Home improvement. What about home improvement?
Mortgage.
Okay, but then again, depending on the amount.
Depending on the amount, I would say consumer.
Yeah, it depends for true.
Yeah. So if if you're adding on an extension or a pool or whatever it is, you might need to go by via mortgage, a second charge or further charge on your property. But if you could do the same thing by consumer, why further tie up your home or your real estate? So home improvement can be a mortgage or consumer loan depending on the amount. Investment, and this would be whether it's a business investment or you're investing in condos, or you're investing in stock shares.
I would say both, Mr. Norton.
Both
Okay,
of
both.
them.
Anything else? Say anything
Both of
different?
them.
Both, yes, okay. Go ahead. Yeah, so investment could, depending on the type of investment again, can be one or the other. Automobiles,
Consumer.
Consumer.
consumer, okay, unless you're buying a Rolls Royce. Education for college education,
Consumer.
consumer, and I mean some people, their children go off to be doctors, and that's a 7 or whatever years. So some of them have not a choice but to do a mortgage. So again, mortgage or consumer. Debt consolidation. Excuse me. Debt consolidation.
Consumer.
Normally we talk about we talk about debt consolidation with consumer loans, but sometimes the customer may have a mortgage, and their consumer debts are what's causing them to drown. So on an exceptional basis, you might want to consider consolidating the consumer debts as part of the mortgage debt. Although, for consumer durables, it means you're stretching the term longer than it ought to be. But then again, we doing 10, 15-year consumer loans nowadays anyhow. So it's like you're paying a mortgage. So that consolidation can be mortgage or consumer. Okay. Medical.
Both.
Yeah, it could be both. But my preference would be not to tie up your house with medical, because should the person not make it or make it turn to the worst, and especially if children are involved, you want to make sure that your clients or even yourself, the roof over their head is protected. So I tend to lean more towards consumer, which your insurance doesn't pay, or fundraisers don't pay. Make the mortgage the last resort for medical. Okay. And especially if it's for your personal medical, because you don't need the stress and knowing how to pay for this mortgage, in addition to the particularly if you have a what you call those, if you have a terminal illness, Okay, it only unnecessarily adds stress. Okay, business startup.
Consumer,
Consumer, yes. And then consumer loans will, when we look at alternative sources of financing, that's for business startups, we'll see that an alternative to borrowing directly from the bank would be, one of those methods would be crowdfunding. So that's where we'll get to talk a little bit about crowdfunding. Okay, so business startup, consumer loans, yes. Shopping,
Consumer,
if you give it to someone for shopping, it'll be consumer. Again, shopping is one of those things like weddings. I personally never encouraged it as
a suit,
a lender. What about vacation?
consumer,
Consumer, again, I lump these three together: shopping, vacation, and weddings. If you know, if you have a choice, you know, you can. I mean, we have our quotas, but I would try to dissuade the customer from going to borrowing for those purposes. But if they have no other choice, you know, fine. If you don't have any alternative to help them, then the consumer loan it is. So school fees, just like, you know, private school fees, et cetera, et cetera. How do you pay? How do you finance those?
consumer,
consumer.
Consumer,
Consumer, yes, okay.
Call your daddy.
House,
mortgage,
Mortgage,
how would you finance a house?
mortgage,
Mortgage, yes, okay. So there you have it. Okay. All right. So any questions before we move from purpose to amount, which is the sum required? No
no,
questions?
sir.
I'm good.
Okay. All right. So let's move to amount. Okay. Now with regards to amount, here are some questions or points to consider. Some questions or points to consider. Is it too much or too little? Is it realistic? Okay, so when a person comes to you, they really need 5,000, but they only want to borrow 3,000. Okay, so okay, if they really need 5,000, but they only borrow 3,000, but they don't have another 2,000, they need to borrow the 5,000. Okay, even if they want to keep the cost down. The risk is that if they're borrowing it for a particular purpose, they may not realize that that objective. So, for example, if they want to get stock for a little convenience store, or they want to get stock in a showcase, and it's going to cost $5,000, they might as well borrow the $5,000 rather than saying, "But I could just get this little bit of stock, and then when I turn that stock over, then I can buy the showcase." But you need the showcase to show the stock. So get the $5,000 one time, okay? And then you don't have to worry about coming to us again and all that. So, so is it too much or too little? Here's a fill in the blank. Is the borrower making a contribution? Okay. Is the borrower making a contribution? So in terms of purchasing, say, vehicles, or other chattels, purchasing a lot or another real estate house or whatever, we say, you know, what have they made a down payment? You know, what is their contribution? what percentage are they putting in? And so for our different loan products, we have certain requirements, whether it's 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever, that the client should be contributing towards the particular item, okay? In a lot of instances, we do 100% financing, particularly if it's salary deduction loan. So we say, hey, what the heck? We got salary deduction, and this is almost as good as gold. Okay. Concerning an individual, apart from the debt service ratios, lenders may use a multiplier of income as a rough guide to determine the maximum a person can borrow. So, for example, they may say we can't borrow any more than 3 times your annual income. And so sometimes you'll see this with staff loans in particular. So they'll say, you can't, for example, a car loan, they may not want you, the staff guidelines, loan guidelines would be, you can't borrow more than, for a car, more than 1 times your annual salary, or for a house, 3 or 4 times your annual salary, okay? And then for businesses, you'll find that sometimes, apart from financial ratios that are used to determine how financially worthy a business venture is, as a rough guideline, lenders may lend less than the net worth of the company or business. So they'll look at the net worth of the company, and let's say the company is worth $250,000, they will not lend more than $250,000. Because if they take what they call a debenture is almost like a mortgage or a chattel mortgage. It is a charge over fixed and floating assets. Okay, so fixed assets of a business would be things like air conditioning units, refrigeration units, what do you call it? Showcases, that type of thing. So those would be like the fixed assets. Equipment, machinery. Floating assets would be more of your inventory. Okay, so what the banks would look at is what is the net worth of the company or the business. So if you have those fixed and floating assets worth $250,000, the bank will not lend, generally speaking, more than the net worth, because worst case scenario, if the business fails and the loan isn't repaid, they feel that they could liquidate those assets and get their money back. So they would not want to lend more than the net worth of the company or the business. Okay. Any questions on that before we move to repayment?
I'm good.
Okay, so repayment. Okay, repayment. Okay. Yes, repayment is the term and is also the payment amount. Okay, repayment, when we're talking about repayment, we're talking about the term and the payment amount. Okay. So the term, is it consistent with the purpose and security pledged? Now we just purpose term exercise, okay? And in doing that exercise, we were saying, is the term consistent for the purpose and the security pledged? Okay, so so normally the short term items, we consumer loans, smaller loan amounts, larger loan amounts. We tend to look at mortgage, and again, the security being pledged would be, in most cases, real estate of some sort, of undeveloped property, or okay. So the term is consistent with the purpose and security pledged. So, for example, you would give someone a 20 or 25-year loan for a car. Okay. and it is unlikely that you'll give someone a 5-year mortgage. Okay, again, I mean, it might be a very small mortgage, they may be able to afford to pay it. But generally speaking, mortgage long-term. Okay. So the term, the first one we look at is the term. Is it consistent with the purpose and security pledge? The second is the payment amount. Okay. What is the payment amount itself? Okay. And again, that is kind of tied to ability. Okay. So there's the payment amount, the term, and then the third thing we want to look at is the source of that payment. Okay. So the source must be identified. It can be, some, nebulous stuff, the pie in the sky kind of thing. It has to be a definite set of income. So salaried income, rental income, business income, dividend income, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So with repayment, 3 main things. Term, is it consistent with the security pledged? 2, payment amount, and 3, and identify that the source is clearly identified. And then we look at a 4th item, which is buena, like buenos means good in Spanish. Okay, so note well. So when you see note buena, okay, note well. That means note very well. Okay, so some types of lending have disciplined repayment programs. So that's a fill in the blank, while others do not. Okay, so personal loans or consumer loans and mortgage loans, as well as business loans, they have repayment programs, okay? Or they have what they call disciplined repayment programs. So your personal loans, your mortgage loans, and business loans, they have repayment programs. They have set disciplined repayment programs. A set amount must come out every month or every quarter, or as the case may be, okay? With regards to overdrafts and credit cards, they do not have disciplined repayment programs. Okay, they're based on minimum payments, which in turn are based on the balance of in the case of the credit cards. Overdrafts is based on how much the account is overdrawn. So you're not going to say every month you put $500 on the overdraft. Okay, with the overdraft, you should be clearing the overdraft by the end of the month. So if you have some payments that you have to do before your payment, before your salary payment date, you take your account overdrawn. By the time your salary comes in, they should clear the overdraft and leave you in credit to use the balance of your funds for something else. Credit cards, similar things should be happening. Whatever is charged during the month should be paid off. Otherwise, the credit cards a little bit more flexible and the overdrafts, but it should work a little more flexible in the credit cards. In that, I'm sorry, the credit cards should more flexible in the overdrafts. My bad. Okay, so credit cards are a little bit more flexible in overdrafts. In that, even if you don't pay the full amount that you charge during the month, you pay a minimum amount every month until it's paid down. But you're being charged the interest on that. Okay. So again, consumer loans or personal loans, mortgage loans, and business loans have repayment programs, but disciplined repayment programs, and overdrafts and credit cards do not have them. Okay. And so that is all we're going to touch on for repayment before we briefly touch on insurance, which is collateral, because we're going to get deeper into this in where is it? Chapter 8. Yes, we get deeper into in insurance or collateral security in chapter 8. Okay. So any questions on this before I go and look at insurance?
I'm good, sir.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so let's move to insurance. Collateral security pledged. Okay, so page 36. Page 36. Okay. Does the client have title to the asset? That is, do they own it? Is it encumbered? Is it held by someone else? So for example, if it's a property, real estate, does another financial institution or private individual have a mortgage over that property? If it's a chattel car, is there a chattel mortgage over that car? Okay, so you want to know, does the client have title to the asset? Do they own it? Because they cannot pledge an asset to you that they do not own. Okay, and so you have to make sure that, as far as practicable, that you ensure that the asset being pledged is actually owned, unencumbered by the person who's borrowing. Okay. The next thing you want to consider is the qualities of the collateral security, right? And we're going to look at the next slide. We're going to look at those. Okay. So what are the four qualities of good collateral security? Well, the first is that it is easy to acquire good title. Okay. So again, going back to the previous slide where we say we want to make sure that they own it, is unencumbered. That's first. Second, we want to know that we can easily acquire it. It isn't too cumbersome. Okay. And so, for example, it is for that reason that a lot of banks want to focus on consumer loans, because they don't have to, unlike mortgage loans where they have to, wait for the lawyer to do title searches and all that, and then come back, and and it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 months, sometimes years or a year if it's some title document is missing or out of whack. They do the consumer loans because in 2 or 3 days the consumer loan is drawn down. Okay, and if collateral is being pledged, it may be from a used car lot or from a new car lot, and so the title is normally given to you by the client who has purchased. So I have a bill of sale, and they have a bill of sale or a pro forma invoice to say that they're purchasing this from this individual or this car company, this car lot. So it's not convoluted. It's easy to acquire good title, or they may be pledging shares in companies that are locally traded. Okay, so it's just a matter of having an assignment done over those shares through the Securities Commission. It is easy to value. Okay, so like financial institutions, we will take out our little blue and red books, maybe valuing cars, or if the car is coming straight off from the lot, whether it's a used car lot or a new car lot, we normally accept the value as the cost of the vehicle. In terms of real estate is assessed by a real estate appraiser. If it's, let's say, for example, it might be a boat. So you may have a marine surveyor do their survey of the vessel and give their opinion on it. So it must be easy to value. So next, easy to value, it must have stable value. Okay, you don't want something that is up today and down tomorrow. So, for example, a lot of what happens on the stock exchange, when you hear them saying the Dow is up, the Dow is down. Well, there are lots of securities that are exchanged on these international markets, US market, Canadian, and otherwise. And those stock prices change, not just daily, they change minute by minute, they can go up and down. Okay, so they're very volatile in that respect. Here in the Bahamas, because we don't have a very well-defined and very active securities market, our stocks and shares tend to move slowly. They react slow. So you can have a stock that don't move for weeks, for months in value. Okay, so to that extent, our stocks and shares are more stable than the ones offered on the stock exchanges around the world, the various stock exchanges around the world. Okay, and then finally, excuse me, you want to make sure that you want to make sure that it is easy to realize if necessary. What do you mean easy to realize? If you have to call in the loan, you can get a sale for it fairly quickly. It's not a convoluted process. Okay. With mortgages, it's a little bit more complicated because you got to go through. In some cases, you have to go through the courts to get vacant possession of real estate that is not. I mean, undeveloped property or vacant lot loans, lots you don't have to, it's not as convoluted as if there's a building on it. It gets even more convoluted if it's the primary residence or matrimonial residence, because then there are certain requirements under the Homeowners Protection Act that further restricts financial institutions on realizing assets. Okay, so if it's a matrimonial home or residential property, it comes under the Homeowners Protection Act, and it's a little bit more complicated. Okay, so the four qualities of good collateral security: they're easy to acquire, good title to it, it's easy to value, it has stable value, and it's easy to realize if necessary. And at the bottom, we see NB Note well. We will discuss different collateral types and documents in the latter part of chapter 8. Okay, the first part, not so much, but we will get into after the first few pages, we will get into looking more into collateral security types, in particular real estate. Okay. Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. So the first 2 points was does the client own it? Then we looked at four qualities of good collateral security. Then you want to ask some questions. Yep. Okay. The third one, sorry, banks may provide unsecured lending to individuals for small amounts, but for larger loans, they may take security, for example, real estate, cash, CDs, or time deposits, or fixed deposits, depending on what your bank calls it, stocks and shares. Okay. For sole traders or proprietors, the personal collateral security of that owner, or that sole trader, that proprietor, often has to be taken from the proprietor. Okay, so that's one of the downsides, is that you have to offer your personal security as a proprietor, sole proprietor, sole trader. However, for limited companies or corporations, they may take a debenture over the assets of the business itself. Again, sometimes the trap that the trap that business people fall in is that we as banks, we ask them to guarantee those loans. And so when you now ask the partners or the owners of the companies or corporations to guarantee the loan, then they are on the hook, very much like their proprietor. So if the assets of the corporation are insufficient to cover, then they could come after the guarantors. They could come after them individually, or they could come after them collectively. Okay. Any questions on any of those items?
No, sir.
Okay. So we have completed Campari, right? So again, Campari, character, the borrower's background or history. Ability, can the borrower meet the payments? Margin, the bank's profit margin. Purpose, the use of the funds. Amount, the sum required. The payment term is the term or the payment amount. Insurance is the collateral security pledged. So that is Campari, using the Campari method. Again, Campari is known as the canons of lending. Okay. So we move on now to credit Cs, and we'll probably go through this fairly quickly. And we'll just make the comparisons where applicable to the Campari method. Okay. So here we have the credit Cs. Okay. So some people say that there are 5 credit Cs, some say there's 6, some say there's 7. Actually, you can have as many credit Cs as you want. Again, this is a lot like, how many steps in the diet process people want to have to lose weight or to do this or do that. But as we'll see, really, it boils down to a few or several key points, and the rest of them are kind of like gravy. Okay, so you have the meat and then you have the gravy, and we'll see which ones are the meat and which ones are the gravy in a little bit. Okay, so as we go through these in your book on page 37, I'm going to actually do something after we go through these. Okay, so against each one of those items that are listed on page 37 under the credit Cs. So we have character, we have capacity or capability, which is the same as ability in Campari. We have cash flow. Cash flow is mainly for businesses. Capital or contribution. Contribution is normally for individuals. Capital is for businesses. Collateral, we looked at that in Campari. We know that in Campari as insurance. Their conditions, are there any special conditions of the loan, or what are the conditions of the loan? Credit history, where we saw that credit history was part of character. Okay, but here again, they have it as a separate item. Then you have connections. It could be that is that person connected to some influential person or affluent person or well-known person? And then you have common sense. So under character, if we look in page 37, it says character, know your client, his background, his history, and use his knowledge to assess the risk. Capacity or capability, the client's ability to meet payments. Cash flow, the business's ability to meet payments. Is the income consistent? Can obligations or bills be met when they fall due? That's some questions you may want to ask yourself concerning businesses. Capital, which is the borrower's contribution. Collateral, the collateral security pledged and its quality. We just looked at 4 qualities of good collateral. Conditions, the first thing you want to do is consider any economic conditions that can affect a borrower's ability to repay, such as unemployment, seasonal work, and B, any special additional conditions that may be applied by the lender to reduce this risk. The lender may impose additional conditions either to compensate for economic conditions or probably based on the overall assessment of the strength of the borrower. So if they feel that the borrower is not as strong as they would like, they may ask them to bring a guarantor, or how to bring a guarantor, or do something else to strengthen the loan application. Okay. Then credit history, how the client paid in the past, and this is a good predictor of how he or she will pay in the future. If the credit history is poor, either get justification for moving forward or decline if it is obvious that this person was poor in the past and is not a good risk to take going forward. Connections says a person of influence, for example, the governor of the central bank. Okay. Common sense, there's a 2-pronged approach. A, it involves the lender taking steps, taking a step back to look at all the information presented and ask the question, does this make sense? Okay, so making a common sense approach. Or B, does the borrower demonstrate an ability to make wise decisions? And you can tell that, one, by the application that they come into you, is it a sound or worthwhile purpose? And 2, you could also tell that from the statement of affairs, based on their assets and their liabilities. Where have they been spending their money? Where is their asset based? In which areas? Are there more consumer durables, or they are more investment type contributions to assets, placing their money, using their money. The debts, what type of debts have they accumulated? Are these frivolous borrowings? Every year they just borrow to go away, to shop in foreign. Okay, so take a step back, and given all the information that you have, does this make sense? And also, is this person a person who you feel is a person who will make wise decisions? Okay. Now, what I want you to do, like I said, on your page, in front of each one of those, I want you to put those letters. A is for assessment, and D is for structuring. So you may have sufficient space where it says list and describe the C's of credit. There are many, and a few of the more important ones are dealt with here. You should have space between that and character to put in A equals assessment and S equals structuring. Okay, these are captured in or covered in chapter 8. And I just want us to identify which of these C's are assessment credit C's and which of these C's are for structuring, when you structure the credit, okay? So you see character, capacity, cash flow, the first three and the last three are assessment related, okay? So character, capacity, capability, cash flow, credit history, connections, common sense, those are assessment based issues, okay? And then contribution, collateral, and conditions, those are concerned with structuring, how you structure the loan, okay? It is, I normally let my students do this so that it helps when you are looking at a loan application to understand why you may use some of these credit Cs and in which capacity you use these credit Cs. Okay. And again, if you don't get them all, because I'm going to move on in a few minutes, or in a minute or two, to look at what I call the big three. Okay. The PowerPoint presentation will come, so if you don't get them all, but just remember the first three, assessment, the middle three, structuring, the last three, assessment. Okay. Any questions on that before I move forward?
I'm good.
Okay. All right, so the big three, this is what I call the big three. The first one is character. So under Campari, C is character. Under credit C's, we have character as well. The second one is ability. Ability under Campari, capacity under credit C's. And the third of the three, the big three, is insurance or collateral. Okay, so insurance under Campari, it's known as collateral under credit C's. And what I've done is I've color coded them. So character is typically the purple didn't look too good, so but I use blue and I call it true blue. Okay, so rather than saying royal character, I say true blue character. So character is blue because it's true blue. You want someone with a very good character, and you see a little what do you call it, emoji there with the wings and the halo. You want someone with a good character, ability or capacity. You not only associate money or the or ability, the main green, so that's why it's in green. And you have the gentleman there with his trolley full of cash, merrily going about his way. And then, of course, you have insurance or collateral. That is supposed to be gold, okay, because you want your collateral to be golden, because it should have those four qualities of good collateral. So character, ability, so again, character or character in the two assessment methods we're looking at in this course. The first one we're looking at is the mechanics of lending, which is Campari. And the second one we're looking at now is credit C's. So it's character for both, ability for Campari, capacity for credit C's, insurance for Campari, and collateral for credit C's. All right. So when we're looking at these items, we're looking at first of all under character, employment history, credit history, net worth. Those are three things that we consider when we're looking at character: employment history, credit history, net worth, and we covered those under Campari quite extensively. Okay, when we look at ability or capacity, okay, we're looking at debts. We're looking at debt servicing, and in particular, the total debt service ratios or calculations. We're also looking at income confirmation and calculations, whether that income is weekly, annually, different types, such as salaries, bonus, rents, etc. Okay, and then the insurance or collateral, we consider the four qualities of good collateral security. So there you have it under character, under Campari and credit Cs, employment history, credit history, net worth. For ability or capability or capacity, you're looking at debt servicing, income confirmation calculations, and for insurance, collateral, you're looking at four qualities of good collateral security. Okay, so let's break down. Let's break these down further on page 38. Okay, it says when we consider, top of page 38, when we consider both the Campari and credit Cs methods of credit assessment, there are three key factors that are common to both and are arguably the most important three assessment factors. Okay, so in our chart, let's look at the first one, character. Again, you see Campari is character, credit C is character. What is the main thought? The main thought is, will the customer pay? Okay, and the explanation, the willingness and propensity to pay, that is, has the client met previous obligations and is meeting current ones? If so, this is evidence of good character. Okay, the next one you consider would be ability and capacity or capability. This is, can the customer pay, or does the customer have the ability to pay? So the explanation is yes or no, whether the client has the financial resources to pay. That is the ability, the capacity, or the capability. Okay, so the first one is, will they pay? That's character. Capacity or ability is, can they pay? Do they have the resources? And insurance is, or collateral is, what happens if they won't or can't pay? Okay, so the explanation is either the client refuses to pay, although he or she has resources, that is, won't pay, or simply cannot now pay due to a change in financial situation, such as job loss, that is, can't pay. Okay, and that those are two different mindsets. Okay, the won't pay customer, that's your tough cookie. The can't pay customer, you can pretty much work with them because they're going through a rough time. They're willing to pay, but they just can't pay. Okay. In either case, the bank will rely upon the asset pledged as security, that is, the insurance or the collateral, for the loan in order to get its money back. Okay. So that is what we have there on the top of page 38. Below that, we have a little chart that says to lend or not to lend. So let's complete that. Okay. Okay. So to lend or not to lend. So here are some combinations where we use the big three. So under the big three, if the person has good character, they have good capacity, and they have good collateral or insurance, should we lend to that client?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we should. Okay. If they have good character and good capacity, but don't have the required collateral or insurance, should we still lend to that client?
Can you repeat it, please?
Okay, if the customer has good character and they have good capacity, but they don't have collateral or insurance, should we lend to that customer?
I would say yes, you can take a chance with that one.
Yeah.
Yes, because if they have good character, remember when we went back? Okay, good character is the willingness of the customer to pay. So good character means this person has a propensity or a mindset that I will pay. Okay, ability means okay, we know that we satisfy that they will pay. So this the psychological makeup is or the personality type is that they will pay. They'll meet their obligations. Okay, and that is provided that they have the resources, so they can pay. So in the second one, we're saying that the person will pay and they can pay. So if they will pay and they can pay, yes, you should consider that client. Okay. Now, what if the client has good character, but they don't have the capacity, but they have adequate or more than adequate collateral insurance? Should we lend to that person? They have good character, but they don't have the capacity, but they have adequate collateral or insurance. Should we lend to that person?
I would say
No,
The first inclination is no, yes. Okay. The first inclination is no. But I would take a deeper dive. Okay. And so I would say no slash forward slash maybe. And so this is why I may say maybe. Let's say, for example, I have I have a lot that a house that I live on. Next door was a shop left to me by my daddy or my uncle or my Grammy. Okay. But the shop, after your mommy or your Grammy, your daddy, whoever left it to you, they died. So the shop is closed, right? Closed down. So if this person doesn't have the capacity, what you can possibly look at is what happens if you look at that collateral that they have, that asset that they have, and turn that asset into an income producing asset. Okay, so let's say he has an aunt who lives with him. Okay, and the aunt doesn't work. But maybe if you reopen the store, the aunt can run the store, and the income level from the store can pay the aunt and help to pay the loan that this person wants. So if this person came to you because they want to buy a car, but they don't have the capacity or the ability, here is an opportunity to create employment for one person, as well as to increase the income for another person. So you may say, okay, well, I could give you $5,000 for this car, but I could give you another $5,000 to paint up this building and put some stock in it and let your aunt run the store, since she wants something to do anyhow. Okay, a little neighborhood convenience store, a little snack store, selling salty and baggy and cup and thing to the churn and thing, particularly if it's in an area where there's a school, so you may get good sales. So if for example, you can turn an asset into something that is income producing, right? Or maybe the person has a hobby. Okay, the person may have a hobby, and then you can turn that hobby into a second job for them. Okay, so you've helped them to increase their income, and hopefully it'll be sufficient so that they now, where they didn't have the capacity, they now have the capacity. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Okay. All right. So the first one is yes. The second one is yes. The third one is on the surface, no. But then again, if you take a deeper dive and there's something you can do to increase the income, maybe. The fourth one, they have bad character. They have good capacity and they have good collateral insurance. Should be lent to that person.
No,
Why not?
because the character is important. The character means you will pay. See, we
Yes.
start from the onset of not knowing of whether or not this person can pay. In certain situations, they'll say, hell no, they'll let it to this one.
Exactly. Because I've seen a lot of situations where and there've been some prominent people making some good money. And they have the ability to, they have the capacity or the ability to pay. They have the collateral, but they just don't, they just build duckers. I will not lend to them people. I'm sorry. I won't recommend it. They'll have to go over my head, the head office or management or whatever it is, and get that loan approved from that level. They'll have to instruct me to process that application. But of my own volition, I will mark on that my findings, the credit history of this person, the payment history from this person is poor. I do not recommend we proceed with this credit application. So it's important that you document it. And so if you are directed thereafter to complete it, at least you have documented your objections. You have your objections in writing. So if Rowdy comes or later on down the line, you say, I was directed, I was instructed to do this. So, okay. And some applications they'll have whether the loan officer approves it or declines it or recommends it or declines it. You circle do not recommend. And if it has a one-up review, then the people who, because that's above your pay grade, like they say, if the manager comes back and say recommended and then head office has approved, you got head office approving it, and then you have the trail there showing that you didn't recommend it. Your manager may or may not have recommended it, but is approved at an executive level. Okay. All right, let's look at let's do an exercise. Okay. So Henry has extensive assets worth 2.95 million, of which 1.85 million is in real estate and 0.65 million is in cash. The balance is in stocks and shares, vehicles, furniture, and jewelry. He earns $10,000 monthly, is not married, but has one daughter who lives with her mother. Henry's credit cards are always over their limit. He has an action outstanding against him in court for child support, and he had a poorly paid loan with Bay Street Bank that was just repaid 5 months ago. He wants to borrow $39,000 from your bank over 7 years, repayable at $750. The total debt service ratio would be 7.5%. The loan should be approved because of the extensive assets, that is collateral or insurance, and large income, that is ability or capacity, that Henry has. True or false?
Should I lend to him?
False.
Yes. Should you give this loan to Henry? Based
No.
on
Henry's a clown.
Henry is a what?
Henry is a clown. Henry is serious. In Old Bay Street Bank, he got a court case against him. why Henry needs to borrow this money if he got all this money?
Yes. Well, sometimes people don't want to borrow their own. They don't want to use their own money. Maybe that's his rainy day money. That's $650,000 he have in cash. He had a poorly paid loan, as you mentioned, at Bay Street Bank, that was finally paid 5 months ago.
His credit cards.
You know, his credit card's always over the limit. His baby mama, he ain't helping the baby mama. She got him in court, right? And even though this TDSR is very low at 7.5%, if he ain't willing to pay, you ain't gonna get that loan paid. So I agree with you. I agree with you. False, do not give him the loan. The loan should not be approved.
Driving by, I'm pretty sure.
I didn't get that, sorry. Okay, so let's look at review question number 1 on page 39. But before we do that, just to recap, okay, so the big 3, character under comparative is also character under credit C's. The main thought is will pay, or willingness to pay. Ability is the same as capacity, capability under credit C's. That is, can the customer pay? Insurance under comparative is the same as collateral under credit C's. That is, what happens if the customer won't or can't pay? And then our options to lend or not to lend, yes, no, maybe, no. Okay, so how do you verify, ratify, confirm the information that is employment, income, current credit facilities provided to you by the client at the application stage? So this is kind of like a long answer, but let's break it down, okay? Again, you won't get into these kinds of questions, these long questions, in the in any of your homeworks or final exam. So how do you verify? Well, one thing you want to do is the employment and income information contained in the employment letter may be verified by calling the company and speaking with the appropriate authorized party, e.g. human resource manager. Also, additionally, you want to check the recent pay stubs that you've obtained and check them against the employment letter and bank records and statements if you have those. And then thirdly, any existing credit facilities, verify them by obtaining printouts of those credit facilities. That is, if they're held with other financial institutions. If the facility is with you, you can check your own records. You know, go on the computer system and check them. Okay, so that is how you verify or ratify, confirm employment, income, current credit facilities provided to you by the client. That was a kind of loaded question. It's 3-part answers. Okay. Question number 2. Past, this is a true or false. Past payment habits are usually, this is page 39. Past payment habits are usually a good predictor of future behavior. This means that we can use the credit payment history of a client to determine how he or she is likely to pay any new loan that may be granted. True or false?
True.
That's true. Okay. The TDSRs established by the Central Bank of the Bahamas should not exceed 35%. True or T by the Central Bank should not exceed 35%. True or false?
That would be false.
False.
That would be false.
A husband, sorry?
I
Sorry,
think
Ms.
that was
Banks, are
the
we-
system lagging.
Question number 4, a husband and wife are applying for a loan. To determine their ability to repay the loan, we use A, B, C, D, E. Which of those do we? Which is the best answer? Or which one is the
D?
answer?
Can we roll with D?
G?
D.
D. D is correct. 100% of both incomes, provided they are salaried income, and usually 50% of any of rental tips, gratuity, overtime, second jobs. Okay, so D is the correct answer. 5. Why do lenders take collateral security? Is it A, B, C, D, E, or F?
D.
D, all of the above, correct. Okay, so so A, B, and C are reasons why we take collateral security. So D, all of the above. D as in dog. And then finally, number 6, under the credit C's method of assessment, we do not consider which one, A, B, C, D, E, or F.
A.
A, yes. Yes, A is correct. Collections. We do not consider collections. Okay. So that ends chapter 7. Are there any questions on any of that we've covered tonight or before?
No questions. The only thing I gotta do is go back over chapter 7. I have to go back over chapter 7.
Okay, well, I'll help you go back over chapter 7, and I'll tell you why, how I can do that in a few minutes. Okay, so there are no questions. You might want to begin reading chapter 8 because we'll start on Tuesday. Read chapter 8, the credit process, essential elements, structuring, that is pricing and collateral security. That's where we'll be looking at PACT. Okay. Also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a homework assignment, which will be in the form of it'll be structured like a mock midterm exam. Okay. So when I said I'm going to help you go back on chapter 7, the bulk of the homework assignment will be on chapter 7. One or two questions may refer to one or two of the previous chapters, but on chapter 7. Okay. So we, looking at DSRs, net worth, calculations, that type of thing. So it'll be like pretty much like what we've covered thus far with Martin and Sherry Roll. You know, we did the net weight statement completion, the total debt service, the TDSR, that spreadsheet, you know, the income calculations, and a few other questions. Okay, so I'll send that. If not tonight, you'll get it first thing in the morning. Okay.
All right, sir.
So any questions on that? Okay. Okay, if not, that's it for tonight. So like I said, I'll send the PowerPoint presentation for tonight along with the homework assignment, which will be tailored like a mock midterm exam. Since we are not doing a mock, since we're not doing a midterm exam because it's summer, but to get into the feel of what the final exam would be in preparation for that, it will be helpful. Okay, so those are the two things you'll get. I said either tonight or first thing in the morning, but not later than first thing in the morning. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so if that's it, everyone have a pleasant good night and a pleasant rest of the week until we meet again.
Good night.
Good evening, y'all.
Good night.